Hello, welcome to another episode of The Moment. I'm joined today by Mark Weisman, who I've got connected with through the new reality TV network, and I'm really looking forward to getting to know him a little bit more today. I'm on my own today because Carl has been pulled away on some important house type stuff, but that's good because actually I much prefer to have the full power of the suite here. I really like to be able to get into some deeper conversation. And so that's what I'm hoping to do today with Mark. So I can see I've got people watching. Let us know where you're watching from. I'd love to be able to draw you into the conversation because this is a conversation that is going to take us on a journey of the ancients. It's going to take us back to our ancestors and our spirits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring Mark on now so we can find out a little bit more about him. Hey, Mark, how are you?
I am wonderful. Thank you for having me. Thank you for giving us some time.
I was really enjoying chatting with you behind the scenes that I almost forgot to start the show. I mean, I was so shocked. I'm so sorry. So apart from that abrupt start, it's 3 a.m. where you are in Anchorage, Alaska. Tell me, because I've never been to Anchorage or Alaska. I don't know much about the shamanism or the Norse traditions. So can you, I don't know, in a nutshell, tell me, if there was a sort of personality of the Norse, what would it be?
Strong. Independent. And then ultimately wise. These are the traits that I've certainly taken away from my ancestors. But one of the things I would say that I most closely associate with when we speak of Norse legend and lore is flaws. And the legends teach us that it's okay to accept those flaws and be who we are. No, nothing to hide. And sure, we're going to make mistakes. Sure, we're going to make poor decisions. But ultimately, it is those decisions and choices that allow us to learn, to grow, and to become who we really are, who our destiny calls us to.
I love that. I love those words of strong, independence, and wise. I love that so much. Yeah, because like growing up in England, we have these stories about sort of Vikings, and that kind of energy obviously was described to us as strong, independent, and wise. And I believe some of my ancestors come from Finland, so I may well have a bit of affinity there. Were you really raised in a Nordic way? Have you been raised with the traditions of your ancestors?
I have not. When I was young, you have to remember I'm the third generation born here in the United States. And my father and his father unfortunately fell to alcohol here in the United States, and they really separated us from this culture, from our traditions, certainly from the family that we had. And it wasn't until probably midway, I would say I was in 30s, almost 40, when I discovered my ancestry, obviously. And then ancestry is like an umbrella, as you do your research and you find who you're related to, and wow. And then you find cousins and uncles and aunts that of course we never knew. And so now I've developed relationships with some of my family who are still living in Bjerreby, Denmark. And so but that kind of came later. And so now I fully embraced it, and I've definitely incorporated it every aspect of my life. So
I love that. I'm not surprised to hear that. We we're migrants. We came from the UK. We're now living in Portugal, and so I meet lots of people who've been on a bit of a journey, and they've left one way of life and they come to another. I notice in many people, and also some of the sort of migrants that I've met in the UK, that a lot of people kind of drop their original traditions and they integrate with the traditions of the places where they get. But I've also heard about talking, about you're the third generation and that your father or grandfather became a bit distracted with alcohol. I've also heard, and I feel the pressures myself living in a different culture. It can take a while to adapt to being somewhere without your context and without your stories.
Right.
So it's an interesting position that you found yourself in, Mark, being a third generation Nordic or Norse man. What was it that gave you the sort of inkling, the sort of intuition to connect with your ancestry and to learn more?
I think there was a lot, kind of back up my story a little bit.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I was very empathic. I was a very empathic young man. And I think like many, particularly men in that era, of course, it was very wrong to be a feely or have, express and display feelings. So a lot of me, certainly I fell victim to alcohol and drugs, went down that road. In 1989, I obviously overdid it and overdosed on heroin. I was found in a drain culvert. I was rescued. I was saved and cleaned up both from the drugs and kind of in my life. And using some of the ideas that we just talked about, they transplanted me. They took me from where I had overdosed in Arizona and plopped me into my family had moved at that point to Washington, the state of Washington. So I moved up there, and literally 7 months, almost to the day, I got married to my shield maiden, whom now we celebrate 35 years of marriage, transitional life. But it was these small nudges and tugs that were occurring soon after after my overdose, and they were just little tugs. They weren't really something where you go, "Oh, here's the sign." It really wasn't that way. It was really kind of nudges here and nudges there and nudges here and nudges there, which would lead me in 2001 to become ordained as a pastor in a Christian church. But during that time, there was all kinds of internal discussion in my mind about doctrine and the ideology, and I was really struggling for a long time. And then in right around 2009, 2010, somewhere in there, I was visited by three lights, and it's the best way I can describe it. I was in a session with a young man who had just returned from conflict. He was having some real challenges trying to understand his life, the meaning of life, as he put it. And these three dots came, three dots of light, and told me that there was another way, essentially. I mean, I began kind of exploring some other ideas and some other thoughts and some other things that would lead me. And then at the same time, I was kind of leading away from the doctrine and the ideology behind Christianity. At the same time, I was drawn in, for lack of a better word, I was drawn in by my mother to do some genealogy. Some very basic genealogy, and I'm not very good at it, by the way. But what I discovered was this heritage, was this family who had come to the United States in 1898 and had begun the American part of our story. It was that genealogy that led me to find out different things about my family and began to pull me into that knowledge, that culture, that very, very, very powerful, rich heritage.
Mm.
And at the same time, as I was studying my family, I began to feel that way, more Norse. What does that mean?
Mm.
And so I came to understand the gods and goddesses, and I came to understand a much broader picture of spirituality. By then, my academia part of that kind of just really expanded, and then that would lead us up until January of 2020, where I would have a vision in my backyard where I would meet Odin. He would come and he would I would actually be able to hold him. We cut our forearms in my backyard, and he reminded me of my birthright of being an Ulfhepnar. And from there, it's just been
It's a whole
an
new story.
amazing journey at understanding me and why I think what I do, and certainly the gods and goddesses and what they mean, and how that all applies to the general psychology of the people I get to work with.
Wow. I love that, because before we started, you were telling me that you did work with people who'd been in trauma and conflict, you know, like soldiers and so on and so forth. And you know what I mean, your story carries so much, but you know, to go to the sort of like depths of the disconnection from your life, like you did with your overdose, and then you know your whole journey back into finding your faith, becoming ordained, finding your shield maiden, and then being visited by your lights, meeting your gods. My goodness, it encapsulates so much. It really is like you've taken yourself off in one direction to actually find your way back home. If that's how it occurs to me. What I'm curious about, I love your lights, by the way. I do want to ask you about those in a second, but I've got a client that sees lights as well. So I'm really fascinated by that. But what I'm really curious about right off the bat is how you managed to sort of integrate your newly found Christian faith with the Norse god traditions and the sort of visitation of Bodin, because you know, like I've found when I've spoken with people with a Christian faith, in terms of gods or planets or any kind of energy, there's a bit of a conflict. I wonder how you've resolved that or integrated that.
Well, I think, you know, one of the things that came to me fairly early, in about 2017, before I met Orthan face to face, I had begun channeling. I had met my great grandfather, and he began to explain how all this kind of fit together. And one of the things that I learned fairly early is the idea of looking at a puddle. And this was the way it was described to me, is that when we look at a puddle, we look at it from our perspective. But if we're willing to just change our perspective a little bit, you're going to be able to see more and different parts of that puddle just by changing our perspective. You know, if we imagine people standing around this puddle, as they look down into the puddle, you know, you see the reflection of the sky above and the person probably on the other side of the puddle. But as we shift, that changes the way it looks. It doesn't change the puddle.
No.
The puddle remains wet. It remains in its shape. Nothing about the puddle changes itself. It's just the way we began to look at it. And I found that in my spiritual understandings, in that I could see where many people who look at Christianity and say, this is the answer, that's a perspective. It's not the only perspective, but it's a perspective.
Yeah.
And when we step to the left or we step to the right, we're going to see our relationship with the deities, with the spirits, with the energies. We're going to see it a little differently. We're going to get a different reflection. There's another person on the other side of the puddle. All of these things change. And then, my grandfather would go on to teach me that my true value in seeing the puddle is when I turn to the person to my left or to my right, and I ask them, what do you see in the puddle? And now I'm beginning this bigger, larger conversation. And that's really where I think I was led. That's really what I was taught. And as I looked at many different people, and I've worked with people now all over the world that have all forms of understandings. They're simply perspectives. We're all looking at the same energy. We're just recognizing it differently, whether it be a cultural difference or whether it be purely a perspective difference. Our experiences teach us that maybe all I see is one God. Well, if you've ever seen a military on display and they're all standing in a row and you're standing at the side, you may only see one person. You may only see the one person standing before you. That's monotheism. But if we step to the left or we step to the right, now we see all the people lined up next to him, right? And so that explains polytheism.
Yes.
So it's just a matter of being willing and open to changing our perspective that allows us to see a much bigger picture. And then I would say probably the most powerful lesson I have ever learned was the fact that spirituality and the understanding of spirituality is so broad that it has plenty of room for all these different beliefs, and no one's wrong.
Yeah.
It's all here, and it's all okay.
Yeah.
It's only the way we're looking at this. And so I think, when we think about those kinds of things, the understanding that if I changed my perspective from Christianity into my case, a very Celtic Norse understanding, all I'm doing is changing my perspective. I'm still looking at a deity for energy. I'm looking at the spirits. I'm looking at that energy moving around and then I think having a very healthy dose of quantum physics and quantum mechanics really helps us understand the science as to how these energies are moving in and out of our bodies and what that means. So that's really where my understanding went to.
I love that explanation. It's genius. In fact, I love I will be using it with your permission for sure. Because that puddle is
not mine.
Absolutely
it is
brilliant.
Not mine.
And I love your monotheism and polytheism description as well. That's a really perfect way of seeing it. I really appreciate that. Tell me about your lights then, because that is something quite unusual that not many people experience. I've got a client that sees lights and sometimes they come in a particular color, sometimes they're kind of dancing around. What's your experience and what did you make that mean?
Well, at first, the first time I saw them, in my case, I thought it was like, sometimes when you blink or an eyelash gets stuck together or something, it just reflects the light differently. And so it took me a while to realize that they were real, and it wasn't just my eyes playing tricks on me. But then, being the doubter that I was in those days, I would actually get rather close to them, thinking it was like the reflection through a bottle of water or something. And it was like, and so it took me a while to realize what they were. it probably took, I think I met with, I don't know, probably 20 or 30 clients where they appeared to me. And I was like, well, are you going to say something? Are you going to do something? And they would simply sit off to the side. They would be out of the way. And if you can visualize for a moment, when someone says something to you and your brain takes that, like that microsecond to think, oh, this is what was said, and it's kind of processing the thought, I began to have some of those.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't that I heard voices or anything like that, but it was like my brain engaged as if someone had said something. And they began to, I began to have these feelings where they were saying, or I was being told, have you considered other alternatives, other options? Are you too focused, or are you kind of allowing your consciousness to just roll with it, so to speak, and to grow with it? And I think that was real eye-opening for me, because it was like, well, no, I'm talking to them about how they should go about doing this. Well, wait, have you considered what they're thinking? Many of the men and women that I've had the honor of working with are very alpha type personalities. They're very, I won't say aggressive, but they're strong, they're independent, they're very willing to get the job done. And so they don't take too lightly, most of them, to being told this is the way.
Yeah.
And there is no other way. Here it is. They're used to adjusting and adapting on the fly. They're used to moving at a high rate of speed, both mentally and physically. They're very able to think on their feet and get things done. So as these lights were kind of giving me these ideas, they're like, well, wait a minute. We need to look at a broader sense here and say, have you considered this? And kind of look at a bigger picture instead of just giving them here's the program, stick with the program kind of thing. Let them be able to use this gift of adaptation and moving forward at a high rate of speed. Let them do what they do. And so they were really teaching me to kind of let go of some of my very narrow views, which would obviously lead me to finding my great grandfather. And of course, then he would go on to explain many more things.
This to me is feeling like almost like a film that you might see at the cinema, like where the central character is waking up, starts to see the lights, and the lights are connecting you with the great grandfather. And and I'm almost seeing like this Lion King, like the past Lion King in the sky talking to you.
Yes, my great grandfather Mufasa, right?
It's interesting you're talking about like grandfathers, great grandfathers, because one of the things I'm picking up from you and when I see you is I feel that sort of benevolent father energy and that strong father energy. And I think there's a lot of reassurance in that. I also think there's a lot of focus currently that I notice on the divine feminine, but not so much on the divine masculine. I feel a bit bad for my brothers because it feels like the masculine has been discarded a bit, and yet there's a it's a much needed place for it. I think.
I think though you have to remember in every particle of energy that moves, we're going to have the yin and the yang.
Yeah.
You must have balance for particles to exist. So yes, we focus on the divine feminine. Why? Because the divine feminine brings love, it brings harmony, it brings pieces that I think have been quashed, I guess, for lack of a better word. it's really been downplayed for many, many years. And I really see an awakening of that energy, of that part of the energy, that's going to begin, in many cases, it's going to start kind of coming back, in my opinion, back in balance. Where, yes, we have masculine energy, and yes, that energy is abundant, but so is feminine energy. And I think people get those two confused, but more dangerously is many people immediately associate the energy to the physical form, and they say, "Oh, you're a large Norseman, and you don't need feminine." And yes, I do.
Yeah, I get your point.
I most certainly do need feminine energy, because that energy is what allows me to be loving to my descendants, to my grandchildren, to anyone. And it opens up, I think, another part of our existence that has been kept in the closet for so long, and certainly downplayed in a superiority type mentality of many countries. I mean, the United States is certainly doesn't hold the key on that. It's worldwide.
Absolutely.
I think it's I really see that energy, not as much that it's so focused, it's that now it's coming back into balance, and we're seeing it for the first time. In many cases, people are starting to see that energy.
Yeah. I love that. This is such a short show. It's only half an hour, and we are coming up to the end. So I'd love to hear a few words about your new show on New Reality TV. So I know you're currently on episode 7 of Infinite I keep wanting to say wisdom for some reason, but Infinite Visions. Tell me a quick bit about that.
Infinite Visions,
and what people can get from it.
Infinite Visions is simply a show. It's about the runes and divination, and how we use that in the modern day. And so in the modern day, I talk about, here's a rune reading. I do a rune reading. I do what's called the Dragon's Foot runes reading, where it kind of helps us to understand some things in our lives that are going on, some of the energies that are going around that week. But I teach people how to use divination for their own personal journeys, whether that be, and divination is done through, I've learned it through the runes, but certainly the tarot cards, there's all kinds of oracle cards and all these wonderful gifts that allow us to really be able to see and understand the influences in our lives that we may not be able to see visually, right?
Yeah.
And so to kind of help us move forward. Infinite Visions is kind of it's a part of a show. My show, Whispers of the Norse, is a deep dive on a particular spiritual bullet point, we'll call it. And we're going to drill down, and I take in the consideration the ancestors, my great grandfathers. And so there are parts of the film where they explain their perspectives. And then I do a trance in the show where we get to hear from not only my grandfathers, but other spirits as well, other ancestors. And then there was a part in that show of a very small runes reading. And I really felt that divination needed its own thing. It needed its own much larger audience, much larger interaction. So that's why we made Infinite Visions.
That's fantastic. I'm so afraid we're going to have to go now. That's gone so fast, but thank you so much. If you'd like to see Mark, then please go to New Reality TV and check out his shows, Infinite Wisdoms and Norse Whisperers.
Infinite Visions.
Infinite Visions. Lots of love. Thank you, Mark. Bye for now.